The God Valley incident is finally reaching its peak as we are giving the shattering revelation of who Davy Jones really was, the man who before Emu used to be king of the world. So let's recontextualize what that means for the past of the Void Century, as well as all the other details in this chapter. On the cover, Perona chases after a rabbit because it reminds her of Mihawk. The scene is likely an homage to Alice in Wonderland, with the rabbit checking the clock, intended as a reference to the iconic scene at the start of the book where Alice chases after a rabbit who is late. In this case though, the rabbit is someone we've already seen before, and it's a member of the Big Mom Pirates called Randolph. Known as the Crane Rider, Randolph is a rabbit homie serving under the crew, being a rabbit that began acting as a human due to possessing a soul within him thanks to the powers of the Soru Sorunomi, or Soul Soul Fruit. He was originally seen gathering ingredients for the tea party during Big Mom's introduction, and later clashed with Carrot in the Seducing Woods, before ultimately being defeated by Chopper and Carrot inside Brulee's house in the Mirror World. Irrelevant as he may seem now, there even was a time where Randolph was considered to potentially be Yonko Commander level, but he's been forgotten in the history of the One Piece fandom. Either way, the chapter unusually opens with a shattering revelation, being that Davy Jones was once upon a time the king of the world. There's a lot we can glean from this little reveal, but let's begin by trying to ubicate ourselves. In chapter 1159, it was mentioned that the Davy clan had gone missing for 800 years, living in the shadows of the world. That would imply that Davy Jones was someone from the Void Century, and his correlation with Joy Boy, as well as Emu seemingly having known him directly, once again reinforces the idea that he was from that period of time from 900 to 800 years ago, or during the 7th century Kaienreiki from the year 600 to the year 700. And on a larger scale, this was towards the end of the Second World, before the foundation of the government, Emu's rise, and the sinking of the world that heralded the Third World. While Jabek here only uses the term katsude, which basically means long ago, the context leads to feel like Jones may have been the previous king of the world prior to Emu, or at least someone comparable to holding that position. And if we associate the idea of king with a kingdom, then it would make sense that Davy Jones was the king of the most important kingdom of the Void Century, the immense kingdom that is associated with the D clan. After all, been told time and time again that the conflict of the Void Century was fundamentally between this kingdom, which Clover described as literally immense, and the allied powers formed by 20 human kingdoms as a force to rival it. And Emu fundamentally said to Cobra in 1085 that the people of the clan are those they once fought as the allied powers in that war, so it would make sense that a D like Jones was the king of this kingdom associated with the D. This also makes me thus wonder if the figure seen on the Harley in the depiction of the Second World with a crown, imposed over the waves rising as a result of the shots fired by what seems to be Uranus, was not Neronaimu as we had assumed, but instead perhaps Davy Jones, and being next to the waves isn't due to causing them, but rather due to sinking beneath them, as we were told that the devil cursed Davy Jones to live on the seafloor, which could be just symbolism to explain that Davy Jones sank with the rest of the Second World. This at least could clarify why Emu would appear here in this spot in the Second World when they already appear much more clearly on the left side of the mural. What is interesting regarding this whole immense kingdom, however, is the fact that it has been so closely tied with the Godland of the Lunaria. As a quick refresher, the Lunaria once had a settlement at the top of the Red Line, which was called a Godland. This terminology of Godland, or Kami no Kuni, God Country more literally, is the same type of definition that was used to describe Skypiea, which is formerly known for its full title of Godland Skypiea, basically like a monarchy but where the ruler is treated more like a god by name, which seemingly was the traditional form of governance for the angel race. The Lunaria seemingly had a godland atop the Red Line, but this was eventually wiped out, and in its place Marijo was built 800 years ago, with almost all Lunaria being persecuted and hunted down. However, this godland seemed to have a really strong connection with the ancient kingdom, as seen in several ways. In the Harley, the biggest players of the Void Century are described as the people of the Half Moon and the people of the Moon. The people of the Half Moon many believe to be the D clan, whereas those of the Moon would be the Lunaria, literally Luna meaning moon and probably having come from the previously colonized moon, making them seem like fairly key players. Furthermore, the Iron Giant Emmet returned to Marijoa 200 years ago upon reactivating, but we don't know why yet he came back to that place. It could be that he perceived the government as the enemy, but could it be perhaps that he also had a a connection with that place. So a lot of people have long since speculated because of all of this, what if the Goblet of the Lunaria served almost as a central location for this immense kingdom, maybe even acting as the capital of sorts in the same way that Marijua does for the government. And given the parallelisms of Imu and Jones, it makes me wonder if that's where the latter ruled from as well. Alternatively, it's also possible that the capital of this kingdom may be what became Laugh-Tale. After all, when Clover described the immense kingdom, he depicted this ancient civilization in the image of these old ruins, but said ruins look almost identical to the depiction that Crocus and Inuarashi have given of Laugh-Tale in chapters 105 and 818 respectively, which has led many to think that Laugh-Tale and the seat of the immense kingdom were one and the same, which would make a lot of sense, but of course that depends entirely on where Laugh-Tale is. A lot of people have speculated that Laugh-Tale could be beneath Marijua, which would connect it more with the relevance of the Goblet of the Lunaria, whereas others think it could be closer by Lodestar or somewhere else entirely, maybe even sunken under the waves. So it's hard to really know more about Jones's past without knowing more about the kingdom, but at the very least, I would be fairly confident assuming that the position Davy Jones held was as the king of this immense kingdom, and he held such global influence that he came to be considered by many as the king of the world, as Clover 2 did tell us about how immense and powerful the influence of this kingdom was. Though its name, he wasn't able to tell us, but at this point I'm still fairly convinced it has something to do with the D if it isn't the kingdom of Dawn or Dawn altogether. The assumption though would be consistent with what Imu is saying, as Mu states, "Nonsense, he was no king, not even for a single moment. The fate that binds Mu and Davy has nothing to do with thou." So essentially, Imu does not acknowledge Davy as a king on the same standing as Mu had achieved, but Jabek clearly viewed him as such, and even calls out Imu for feeling threatened over just the name. This would make sense with our previous assumption that Davy Jones was simply the king of the man's kingdom, so not a formal position as king of the world, but that his influence was so widely recognized that many started to revere him as a sort of king of the world. But who knows if Imu's statement has more nuance to it than just that. That said, I'm sure that you're probably asking about another important figure of the Void Century and how they fit in all this. We know of course that the man who they called Joy Boy was born within this immense kingdom and fought on its side during the war. As such, in the past, many people assumed in the fandom that he could have even been their leader or king, but keep in mind, that's just all fan speculation, due to his leading position in the war, as nowhere in the manga has it been stated or even inferred that Joy Boy was, in fact, a king. The closest connection would be the Sea Kings talking about their two kings meeting again, which even the prophecy Otohime mentioned of a new Joy Boy meeting with the new Poseidon would suggest that's the two kings that the Sea Kings were talking about, but again, that's all speculation. What this chapter seems to steer us more towards is that Davy Jones may have been the actual ruler of this immense kingdom, while Joy Boy was a leading figure within it who simply was more of a guiding force, like a hero to its people. After all, if Joy Boy was anything like Roger or Luffy, he wouldn't really be someone interested in leading, as Roger rejected Shiki in trying to rule the world together, and Luffy himself also isn't interested in that kind of ambition. The question is, however, how close exactly were Jones and Joy Boy? Were they full-blown allies working side by side to take down the allied powers as proper nakama, or was their dynamic more similar to that of Luffy and Teach, people with opposed ideals, but that still have a common enemy? Even within this chapter, Jabak brings up the parallel, asking Imu who they're more afraid of, Davy D. Jones or Joy Boy. He also very explicitly states that the will of Davy remains inherited. The day will arrive that someone will come to fulfill the promise, shown over a panel of Ares and Teach, an implication of how Teach will inherit the will of Davy. Despite its wording, I don't think that this means that the D stands for Davy, as Davy Jones does sound kinda dumb, but more that, much like other members of the D clan, Jones's will gets passed on. But how much is the will of Davy consistent with the will of D? Is Davy's will that of the people who seek the dawn, wishing to put an end to the cruel rule of corrupt humans to make the world more free and equal? Or is the will of Davy simply that to attain power again and have it in their hands once more, regardless of the consequences for others? After all, Teach is not exactly that good of a person. Neither was Jabak by all means, but Oda has gone out of his way in this flashback to depict Jabak as a more charismatic and noble individual. We've been shown how much he's cared for his family, even being heartbroken heartbroken later this chapter upon thinking he may have killed them. He still cared a lot for his crew and friends like Harald, and overall has been depicted as a likable character. He still did lowly things like hurt a kid Loki and raid and pillage as a pirate, but he's definitely fallen more on the morally ambiguous side of morality than we were first being led to believe. But by contrast, Teach couldn't be more different. Yes, he still has charisma and he has a respect for dreams and his opponents, like we saw him encouraging Luffy to go find the Sky Island, but he's also been repeatedly shown to be a heartless monster. Someone who has killed people he was close to for the sake of his own ambition, including a close friend like Thatch, whom the Ace novel implied was killed because he had eaten the Yami Yami no Mi and Teach had to kill him to obtain it, or his very own adoptive father once again for his fruit. We've also seen that Teach has captured a lot of innocent slaves at Hachinosu which Kobe had to free, including members of many unique races, just because they sell for higher prices, and has been involved in the underworld society, as well as pillaging and having his subordinates raid impoverished nations like the Lelouch Kingdom, though I wonder if there's any connection with his mother wanting to flee there with him. We've seen that he and his crewmates even seem willing to assault women and commit many other heinous crimes, so Teach is definitely far from a morally ambiguous figure, but he too shares the same ambition that Zebag had. Rox wanted to become the king of the world, to usurp Imu's position, but seemingly to take it for his own too. We don't know what a Zebag land rule would have been like and if it would have been any better or worse, but we can assume at least a Teach-led rule would be quite catastrophic, at least as bad as this one, as Teach's man did say that his ambition too was that of the world. If Imu's rule is more like an over-controlling dystopia, I can see Teach's rule almost becoming a fully chaotic anarchy. So with how much Oda has built up, how much of an opposite Luffy and Teach are, then what was the difference between Joy Boy and Davy Jones? Were they part of different factions just involved in fighting against the same common enemy, or were they more closely allied, with Jones being more similar to the morally grey Zebag than Teach? If that's the case though, what happened with Teach? How did Teach become the monster that he is today? And how does this all tie with the Yami Yami no Mi, and why was Teach so convinced he had to attain the Yami Yami no Mi ever since he was young, following this path of darkness? Well, that's a lot of questions to process, so for now let's unwind a bit by focusing on the other aspects of the chapter. Something worth bringing up during the conversation between Zebag and Imu is once again Imu's speech pattern. For as solemn and terrifying as Imu may sound, when they lose their patient, Mu begins to sound a lot more childish, as we've pointed out before. For example, Imu uses the second person pronoun Nusia, as we've mentioned, which is derived from the archaic Nushi and is comparable to the English thou. But here, to refer to the third person, Mu refers to Jones as Aitsu, which is basically a very informal that guy, and also referring to Jones and Joy Boy as a collective of Aitsura, or those guys. It's also interesting that Mu claims that their relationship with Jones has nothing to do with Zebag, despite calling him Davy Jones in just the previous chapter, and once again later here. Again, does Imu know something special, or is Imu just borderline delusional? Despite the opposition that Zebag has put up though, Imu ultimately fully converts him with Domi Reversi. The process is intense, as the sound effect Bari Bari can be read around them, which is the cracking of thunder caused by powerful haki, seemingly involved in this move to more forcibly convert Zebag. Beyond the teeth, Zebag now gains also flaming eyes, large wings forming from his cape, and his size also considerably increases, just as we had seen with the giants, towering even over the likes of the 8.8 meter tall Linlin. He swiftly swats her away, and Kaido as well, and has an intense clash against Newgate, whose cracking is so powerful that it collapses one of the two halves of the mountain composing the eponymous God Valley. It's implied that Zebag emerged victorious from this clash, and I wouldn't really count Newgate out, nor would I count Kaido or Linlin out after just a hit. I wouldn't be surprised if they came back later on to help join in on the fight in helping put their captain to rest. Many around the island react to the chaos, such as the celestial dragons scrambling to get out. We see one of them uses the first person pronoun Wachikira, which is a very archaic pronoun that was mostly used by females such as geisha, but in this case of a celestial dragon, it just comes off as pompous and even borderline childish. The Roger pirates meanwhile are also escaping from the island with treasure in hand, and you may notice that on one of the chests, the writing ZZZ can be seen, showing that it's the chest inside of which Shanks is sleeping. On the other, Dragon is frustrated with himself about the fact that he couldn't even save one child. This scene is not only incredibly similar to when Luffy broke down in Shabondi after being unable to save the members of his crew, but even the dialogue is fairly similar in Japanese, showing a clear parallel between father and son and their helplessness at being unable to protect others. But with that said, I wonder if Dragon ever found out that the kid he saved was Shanks, or if he still to this day isn't aware that he helped save the future Yonko and still thinks that that child might have died. And if he doesn't know, will he ever come to know, or will it just be left that way? The other Rocks pirates have been scattered about, with Captain John injured and trying to get away, probably surviving to one day gather more treasure and be betrayed by his crew as we were told. Ganzui meanwhile has been injured as he tried to jump Shiki but ultimately lost the battle, since Shiki was likely considerably stronger than him. Shiki himself seemingly got off this whole thing pretty well, as his Fua Fua no Mi, Float Float Fruit, allows him to simply fly away from the island as freely as he wants to, so he likely escaped the ensuing chaos with chest in hand. If that chest really was worth 8 billion berry all on its own, then that would have been enough for Shiki to be able to fund his pirating efforts and pave the way towards funding his pirate fleet in the future. Though within all this chaos, I wonder where the likes of Stussy or Barbel are at. Ultimately though, Jebek catches up to Aris and Teach, but she seems to understand quite quickly what happened. She shockingly even seems to have an idea of what Imu is, as she refers to Imu as Aitsu, which again is a third-person gender-neutral pronoun in Japanese, and claims that Jebek ended up meeting with Imu earlier than he should have. Aris and Teach are pincered in an impossible situation, with Jebek about to kill them and marine battleships trying to fire on them to stop slaves from escaping. But at the last second, Kuma comes in and helps them escape, and since Kuma is about to get caught in the crossfire too, he sends himself flying too, escaping from the island that way. This is poetic in more ways than one, as it is beautiful to see how selflessly Kuma is willing to put himself in danger's way to save others, but at the same time, it's also a bit gutting because Teach's survival will lead him to become a pretty horrible person. Even more ironically, we know that in the future, Teach tried to force Kuma's very own daughter, a 10-year-old Bonnie, into becoming his own woman in exchange for her freedom. Though he may not have known about her true age, it still doesn't take away from how disgusting of an action that is, and how tragically ironic it is that Kuma saving his life would come to bite him back that way. Thankfully, Teach was chased away by Sakazuki and Bonnie later broke out on her own, but Kuma's other friends like Gyogyo weren't as fortunate and ended in jail as the result of Teach surviving. We now understood that not just Teach but also Eris escaped from the island. Interestingly, Kuma's fruit only allows him to send people somewhere he's previously been to, which at this age would only be like the Sorbet Kingdom and Marijois, so I'd imagine they must have been sent to the former. But that brings the question again of what happened to Eris, considering that by age 12, Teach was already an orphan begging Whitebeard to let him on the ship. And I do wonder if Kuma and Teach and Eris interacted more upon landing in Sorbet or not. Still, at present, both Imu and Jebek seem to believe that the two are now dead, so Imu, once again calling Jebek as Davy, tells him to go kill all others on the island. But of course, history once again comes to be fulfilled as Garp and Roger call out to Jebek, with a scream so powerful that we see a haki burst from it, as once again indicated by the bari bari sound effects. However, Jebek, in tears over the grief of believing to have killed his wife and kid, begs Garp and Roger to stop him. But since he cannot talk anymore, instead he seemingly does this through the voice of all things. We knew Roger spoke the voice of all things, but now we get confirmation Jebek and Garp did too. This adds them to the list of Luffy, Oden, Momonosuke, and Shirahoshi, as well as creatures like the Sea Kings, Zunisha, and Emmet. Since Joy Boy was shown speaking with Emmet, it seems to indicate he too could hear the voice of all things. Interestingly though, in the Viver cards, Momonosuke and Shirahoshi were listed as observation haki users, despite never showing in any capacity haki, which strongly implied that the voice of all things works in some form through observation haki. But I still wonder more than anything how someone develops the voice of all things, as it doesn't seem to be tied with just having good haki, since the likes of Shirahoshi and Momo developed it, while the three-eyed race was also said to be able to hear the voice of all things, though Pudding hadn't quite awakened yet due to being a half-blood, so I wonder what the requirements are. Regardless, as we had thought, Jebek begs the two of them to kill him, thus setting in motion the duel between Roger and Garp versus Jebek. I do wonder if the other members of the Rocks will come in to assist, or if something else will hold them up, such as Whitebeard potentially fighting someone like Garling as many have speculated, or if the whole group will be fighting a raid battling against Jebek. At last, the duel begins with Rocks leaping towards Garp and Roger, and if you notice, their poses are faintly reminiscing of the picture that Sengoku showed says in his explanation of God Valley, with Roger holding his sword over him and Garp readying to charge his fist. Though in that original picture, Oda had accidentally depicted Roger with the wrong hat and his mustache, as he also did in the storyboards he provided for film Red, before changing him to look younger and have the straw hat instead. But still, it's unbelievable to think that this side, which we had been told about 6 years ago, is finally coming to play in front of our eyes. The real God Valley incident begins right now.